Hi guys, it's Paul from Itris and welcome to episode 9 of The Corner. On today's episode, we're going to be interviewing our Associate Director of Learning and Organisational Development, Ian Farrow. Ian is a double award-winning L&D professional with over 14 years experience and has a deep understanding of all things learning, training and organisational development. Hi Ian, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to The Corner.
Thank you.
So today I want to discuss with you some important topics related to recruitment software, and in particular software implementation, learning, and how employees and employers can engage with their tech through training.
Yep.
I've got some questions for you. We'll dive straight in. So let's start with the basics. So how can businesses ensure that their staff are trained properly and engaged in the implementation process?
Yeah, so a number of factors to this question. Firstly, failing to plan is of course planning to fail.
Famous old saying.
Yes, definitely. So it's true. Very, very true. It happens too often, unfortunately, and it relates to the change management piece as a whole. That I'm sure we're going to cover that kind of theme throughout. Well, yeah, with a number of the points we're going to be talking about. So I think that goes back a step to ensuring that actually the reason why you're changing is determined up front. What is it that your previous system, or if you didn't have a system, what could it not achieve? What is it that you needed this new system to achieve? And ensuring that that's communicated and conveyed way before even the training implementation. So straight away, these are the benefits. This is what we're getting from having a new system. This is what you're going to be able to do. Don't be concerned. Don't worry. About 70% of change management initiatives fail because they occur to people, rather than realizing that actually it's the people that result in the change being a success or a failure. So ensuring that everyone's kind of bought in up front, I think massively helps. And then later with that plan, part of that becomes training. So what does the training look like? How much training? Who's providing that? Is that from the provider? Is that live training? Is that some stuff that's on demand? Is that even going to be stuff that the client supports with some of their perhaps decision makers or internal experts that they'll ideally have?
So we talked before about key stakeholders as well being involved throughout the whole process, which you touched on there. What we said before, even before you start that sales cycle, even before you look at new software.
Yeah.
Really you want to look at your existing software. Because quite often, obviously, we want to, advise people well when they're looking at new tech, but also with their existing tech, just identifying who's your key stakeholders.
Yeah.
How are you using your existing tech? Are you utilizing it properly?
Yeah.
Because that can also be a point of, well, actually, maybe we don't need to look at new tech. Maybe we just need to look at some training for our existing staff. So those key stakeholders, again, we've touched on previously, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is so key, and that communication piece is like, if people are moaning about their existing software, you almost want to delve into that. Okay, what's the problem? What are the areas? What are the pain points? What is working well? What isn't working well? And again using both of those.
Yeah, in terms of stakeholder mapping, we'd recommend something like the stakeholder salience model, where you're kind of looking at all the people that it would relate to. So some of those might be new people, because perhaps, the obvious ones are obviously the recruiters that will be using it day to day. But in terms of that kind of model, there's kind of three aspects to it. Effectively, it forms a Venn diagram. It's urgency stakeholders. So they're the people that are kind of needing it very quickly. So perhaps there's a legislation change, or there's a financial need because you've transitioned. So they're going to be using the system because maybe it can do things the previous one didn't, or they didn't have a system. Some kind of change has resulted in them having kind of urgency, and they're important users. Then there's the legitimacy stakeholders. So those are the people that will be using it day in, day out. They're kind of key customers in terms of actual day-to-day usage or frequent usage. And then you've got the power stakeholders. So they won't necessarily use it, but it matters to them. So perhaps they're, the senior leaders, the managers of the business. They've realised there's inefficiencies with not having a system or having multiple systems that don't communicate with each other efficiently or effectively. And then kind of plotting those people in the Venn diagram, and ultimately where those Venn diagrams overlap, you end up with different stakeholders that have different influence and different significance, and subsequently you want to kind of utilize them and bring them on board in different ways, but they're all important. But it varies.
You said about the sort of power users.
Yep.
Quite often the data or the level of data or functionality they will want to see is very different to the end users or the frequent users of the system. So I suppose it's important to have different communications with different with different key stakeholders as well. Not the same message for everyone.
You're absolutely right, and we've seen it where users, in terms of different teams. So obviously the classic one is the recruitment team and function, and perhaps the recruitment administrators. But other parts of a business, such as marketing or more finance, are easily forgotten. And if they've already been using a system that interrelates or perhaps doesn't, if they're not involved in the process and discussions as to what it can achieve, what's going to be used, there'll be anxiety there. And we've certainly seen it where decisions have been made and they haven't been involved, and they're frustrated or disengaged because maybe it doesn't always meet their expectations, or their expectations haven't been managed, or ultimately they're not wanting to use a new system because they prefer complete control. There's a number of factors there, even though it might benefit them to do so. It's fear of the unknown. So a number of aspects there. In addition to what you were saying, Paul, there's a classic thing that often occurs where people will change system, and even though our systems are very powerful and very useful, and people will often perceive there's many advantages to transitioning to it, there are times where things, even from existing systems we've had, there'll be aspects that people won't have documented, or changing from a competitor or what have you, where there are key things they want to use all the time in different roles, different functions, but they haven't necessarily ensured that those marry up in the new system. They might have been wowed by new features and functionality, and they're not really ensuring that the kind of essential pieces are still there. Kind of wrongly assuming,
assumptions. It's like the mother of all, bleeps. That really is the case. And we try very hard throughout all of our processes. We've almost had to define our processes internally here around, trying to help people identify their own, needs without them assuming, the system does that. Because quite often they might see, it does timesheets. Or it does compliance. And a lot of people see it as like a tick box exercise.
Yes.
But actually, without delving down into that key stakeholder who actually uses that, who's defined the process on how that works internally, ideally they need to be drilling down into that feature to check that it works for them. Just because it says a word doesn't mean it's got to meet your processes. And if they're open to change, they're changing their processes, great. Quite often, like you said, particularly with back office staff or as marketing, it might be the case that actually their processes are so intertwined in everything they do that actually it's very difficult for them to change because of the reliance on perhaps other systems or whatever that might be. So that's a really good point, and one we often try and hammer home in terms of identifying those things.
It really impacts the success of the change piece. Yeah, certainly.
And like you said, unfortunately, it's very common for that to be overlooked. The statistic you said, like 60%.
70% of change initiatives fail. And a huge part of that is the communication. So and potentially people not being involved in the decision making process up front. So the change might happen to them, but it isn't being conveyed as to why. And then there'll be anxiety that occurs because there's fear, and people are scared of the unknown. So the more communication that happens, the more they can be put at ease, and there's positive messages and how this is going to benefit you, but also ensuring that it's meeting their needs, documenting that, and having a team in place that's representing those users, and so they'll feel at ease, and ensuring that those essential bits of functionality are there. And then there are also the nice to haves.
Okay, great. So having worked in the industry, consulting with iTrust customers for over 14 years, congratulations. What types of training do you recommend for businesses?
As much as possible, Paul. Lots regularly. There's all sorts. There's a whole range and a host of things that ideally people would do. But actually, linking back to what we were talking about a second ago, providing time for people to actually have the training on a regular basis is important. And actually that ties into what we were talking about previously in terms of the plan, and working out if the product fits as well. Is often the time just isn't dedicated. We understand recruitment is a time-short industry,
Sure.
and there's a lot of conflicting and competing pressures and priorities. But getting it right up front is pretty key. So providing time for people to decide on the system and work out the plan and communicate and so on, but also the time for the training to occur thereafter. But to be specific in terms of what kind of training we'd recommend, this has kind of shifted over the years as the generations have shifted.
And the work from home.
Yes, aspects too, isn't it? Yeah. And technology's changed. Yeah, absolutely. So, with millennials, so Generation Y and Generation Z now in the workforce, the way that they consume content to learn is quite different to previous generations. So historically, from our perspective, we'd often provide training on site. Gradually, the offering transitioned as well to online. But when it was on site, it would often be an intensive whole day's course. And whilst we love databases, and I'm sure lots of the users do, that's regardless how fun we can make that, that's still a database, and that's a day's content. Even when you think back to school or university or any kind of studying, it would often be a shorter period of time, maybe an hour and a half at most, and because it isn't conducive to optimal learning ultimately.
But it is that classic sort of classroom style learning.
So
So where things were,
certain how styles work. Yeah, on some degree, and often people's expectations are that as well. And so we've shifted away from that with those kind of new generations, their expectations in terms of, often how people now generate or utilize content that's generated on the internet to learn, which is, shorter YouTube videos, on demand,
short form content.
Absolutely. And the TikTok stuff that's incredibly quick and bite size, isn't it? That's really engaging. We've kind of met that, and we feel that actually consuming as much content as possible regularly is much better than the historical approach, which was, a reasonable amount of content at the point of going live, perhaps a little bit before, but certainly at the time of going live, and then often not a lot thereafter. It isn't the best way. During the kind of implementation stage or pre-implementation, though that kind of usage decision maker or that team that's decided on the system, that's perhaps considering the processes, would be learning the system through on-demand content, perhaps some online training that's kind of shorter, perhaps face-to-face, of course, if needed, if that's all that's available or offered.
And often that comes at different sort of stages in the process. We talked previously on project management and that kind of stuff, and where your department in particular comes in at those different stages. So again, going back to time, I suppose it depends how much time they've got.
Yeah,
depends on what kind of who the key stakeholders are. Yeah, might depend on what sort of content. If it's short form content, if it is more sort of face to face or online, are they defined sessions? Are they Q&A sessions?
Yes. Yeah, and I think if those people up front are learning an awful lot about the system, that's going to help with determining how the system's utilised, and then thereafter working out what training's relevant for people after this. So some of the stuff that we'd recommend that we do currently is the on-demand content. Utilise that for those decision makers. An online session as well. We then recommend for the users that will be going live to have some of that knowledge be kind of drip fed through to them prior to going live. So utilise on-demand resources, potentially an online session as well, a short one, so it isn't too much, isn't too daunting, and then floor walking ideally. So have experts from your provider turn up on the day of go live, or perhaps even a few days, because that can really make or break the way people perceive the change, if it's effective, the implementation of the software.
And that will help with that anxiety you were just about sort of previously, because some users will be really bought into the change, really pro change. They may have used the system previously, so they might be sort of walking out, I used to use that system when I worked at whatever company. So they're probably a little bit more confident than perhaps someone that's, like I said earlier, either new to the business, new to systems in general, or in fact has used the same system for 20 odd years and doesn't necessarily like change, you know.
Yeah, because even if you're a really enthusiastic user and you're really pro the change, ultimately you might still find that there's frustrations because you've got a workload you're trying to manage, and that you were, efficient and effective with whatever you were doing before, even though arguably you'll hopefully be more efficient soon enough. There's a learning curve, and from day one, you're not necessarily as fast. You're not going to be. That's an unrealistic expectation. But perhaps that is the one that's been conveyed to the user, or it has been made explicit, which ideally it would be as part of that regular communication in terms of that team, that change management, that planning, so that people realise, well, actually, there's going to be frustrations on day one, even though we buy into the system and know it's going to provide and deliver benefits. But for the first X number of days or weeks, we're finding our feet. Don't expect to be as efficient as you were. But the good news is you've got floor walkers on site. They're going to help you with how-to questions when they come up live, where you're trying to actually utilize the system. This isn't theory-based learning anymore. This is live. Try to implement it, to utilize it, and be efficient and effective. So that really helps, because otherwise frustration occurs. And imagine if you don't have an internal expert who hasn't had a lot of knowledge and training, then who is going to help? People are just going to suffer, sometimes in silence, or perhaps not in silence, and might impact other people's perception of the product and or the new system. And then thereafter, ideally, continue with as much learning as possible. Drip feed it thereafter. Scale up. So, the first aspect will be finding your feet, and then start getting the bigger wins from the system, the things that really provide advantage, but perhaps come with you being efficient and effective and understanding how it works.
It's that whole sort of walk before you can run type.
Yes.
You can't just sort of rock up at a you've done a couple of 5Ks over the last few years. You can't just rock up at a marathon and, I know how to run. And try and take that head on. To work up to that. Yeah, and like I said, quite often a lot of these systems offer loads and loads of features, and some you may or may not be aware of, and then it's kind of working out what parts do you want to utilize. And I think, like you said, that whole communication piece. So this might be, here's the new system, or here's what we found in our existing system that may benefit you. Here's how you can learn it, and here's how we as a business are going to implement it into our process. So it's perhaps the way that content is served up as well. Like you said, the short form content is great, for those, I wonder how that works, a minute, 2 minutes, just delving in. You can very quickly pick up, and that's something I can use. That's something that can help me in my day-to-day duties or process or whatever it is. Or is it actually, that's not kind of how we work? Or maybe we can suggest that as a change internally, but it's not something I'm going to learn straight away. I think old school wise, a lot of suppliers would either have like an off-the-shelf course, which is still relevant in some scenarios, but for the short form content, you don't want people sitting in a classroom all day or learning all of this stuff, and out of that, the portion they've learned, actually only 10% of that is relevant to them. So again, breaking those key stakeholders down, like you mentioned earlier, will be key to that. And then in terms of what training is relevant, what type, like you mentioned, the time, ensure they've got the time to digest that content, and then implementing it. Yes, that's all really good.
Yeah, with the processes you were talking about there, ideally that team, that decision making team, that kind of project implementation team, even learning the content through the provider or what have you, it's not going to be necessarily bespoke to how the client or the users will be needing to use it as per their processes. Potentially could with bespoke training. Yeah, it's usually more costly. It often takes longer to deliver, to produce and create, and
that is something we offer.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's rarer.
It is, because of delivery. Yeah, because in an ideal world, having people that know the system internally are going to be able to better identify that or highlight what should be used and shouldn't. And actually, that takes us back to one of the previous points that links in nicely. That when you're transitioning to new software, there are advantages that you want to arguably utilize to grab hold of, and it's the perfect opportunity to reconsider the processes that you have in place with your last system, and not just rush and try and recreate everything, because sometimes the things that were in place aren't necessarily the most effective. And we've often seen it where people will rush through just trying to recreate the processes of a previous version of Nitrous, or even different software. And sometimes it's a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't really work. There are costs to that in terms of advantages lost, new functionality you can't utilize. And so it's a really important piece to ensure that actually you're also getting the tangible benefits of why you changed as well. You can lose them otherwise if you just rush the process. So then someone considering that in terms of the training as well of, okay, yeah, ITRIS have highlighted that you can do it that way. We do it slightly differently because there's different ways of doing it, and this is why. And also providing the why, so people are more likely to do it. If people are told, sometimes that doesn't happen. And a case in point is regularly, something specific, the sources. Over the years, people would regularly kind of select a source against a candidate record for where they came from.
Yeah, so a source, we define in ITRIS is a media source, a media source in terms of like a job board or an advert or a social media platform or something like that. So, being able to track where that applicant's come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen it so many times over the years where it's not explained to the user as to the benefit. I mean, it might seem obvious to most people. It seems fairly obvious, but I've seen it so many times where I say it's a mandatory field, which means people have to fill it in, which obviously people can determine themselves and part of their processes and work out how they're going to use the system. Sometimes they'll make it mandatory, but not convey to the users the why. Why is it beneficial? And it's for reporting and working out return on investment. So don't just select the top one on the list, because otherwise we're not going to renew that job board for JME. And actually, that's where most of our placements come from. I've seen that so often, and it's also a big part of it is the communicating the why, communicating the benefit.
And that could lead on what we've discussed previously as well, is that whole communication then with your applicants and contacts and companies and jobs, etc. If you're putting that wrong piece of data in, that can have a massive impact on other systems and other process that are perhaps linked to that.
Yeah.
Going back to the point you just said a minute ago, in terms of those processes and the way it's always been done and why it's a really good time to review those when you're looking at your software, what we find, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot, is 9 times out of 10 can guarantee those processes are being put in place because of the limitations of the software that you're reviewing.
Yeah.
So actually, because it's, we do it this way, well, why do you do it that way? Actually, 9 times out of 10, the reason why they're doing it like that is because either their current system isn't able to, or this process was defined because of X, Y, Z. And that might be them using a different field or filling in something manual every time or whatever, just because that's the way they used to do it.
Yeah, and often people can't see wood for the trees there as well. They become so ingrained, the behaviour, that people can't even answer as to why they do it that way. That's just, they do it that way because that's how they've always done it. That's what makes sense. And sometimes it's really hard to step out from the process and recreating it and actually thinking about let's slow things down for a minute. Let's look at the bigger picture as to, is this the best way of approaching this? Are there other ways of doing it? Do we need to try and recreate this process that could well have been a workaround that might not be fit for purpose anymore, that might actually be hindering us, that we might lose other advantages in our new system if we try and recreate that process within it. I think I've had that just recently, speaking to someone that was transitioning where they to 9, where they were trying to recreate a process, and actually there's all kinds of benefits they've been missing out on there.
I don't need to do that.
No, exactly. I'm not sure that there is actually a real need. I think that they could do it in a different way, and hopefully they get there with it. But sometimes it's really hard because it's rushed. The process is often rushed, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's where, obviously, in terms of the type of training, again, it stems back to, invest that sort of time initially in reviewing everything, and that, I suppose, help you identify, what's right for your business. Because actually, if you need guidance from your supplier in terms of change management support, that can be on offer. There is bespoke options there. However, if you have mapped it all out, you've got this great plan and you've reviewed all your processes and you know what you need, great. But actually, we can help with that and we can help advise. And we often do, particularly with our customers from, like you said, our older products, transitioning to our newer products, it's still a change. It's still a change in software. It's still a big change piece. So, we can help you identify what that needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, lean on your provider, lean on us to try and maximize it, because, we've done it many times over, and of course our clients will have done it once every, hopefully, decade or so, or if it's changing for
some of our businesses are like 20 years. Yeah, 20, 30 years.
So it's even more significant, and they're going to be less experienced as a result. So lean on us as the experts or your other provider or what have you to try and ensure that you're doing it correctly.
So we've discussed before on the call the benefits of a dry run, which for those of you that haven't seen the project management episode, is a state during the project phase that you get your data in the new system and you get to play about with it, check it out. So how can this be utilized from a training point of view?
Oh, it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity that provides time with the system, with your data in it, as opposed to it being empty. So it feels tangibly, how it will be when you go live. So it's more realistic for training. The retention is going to be better. So potentially the person or the team that are kind of implementing it or reviewing the system would utilize that to check processes, to ensure that everything that they're thinking of transitioning to in terms of or replicating or changing works, that the data's in the right place. Because sometimes actually when starting to utilize the system, you might realize, actually we were thinking of having it in this place, but actually it'd be better if we had it here. So that's another advantage there.
And we might advise on those benefits. Actually, if you use this field for that piece of data, here's what other benefits this could bring as well.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not as straightforward as definitively put it here, because there's different advantages to having something in different places. Or even sometimes people don't bring all of their data across, so understandably, because it's an opportunity to reduce it down and cleanse and clean. But some things might not come across that could be useful, and suddenly you realize, actually, this could be here, and this will help with training. So it also provides the opportunity that you're not really messing with the live system. If you're using a dry run system, that data can easily be just removed thereafter. So the cleanse and quality of your system isn't impacted.
And often we'll put things in place, so it's almost like, obviously it's a safe environment in terms of tech and security. But actually we can put certain things in place, whereas we can hook it all up to the email accounts, but we can ensure that nothing's actually set. So if you're doing like a dummy placement, actually you're not going to receive like a placement confirmation email that you've set up automated in the system, say congratulations on your new role, and you're going to be at this place at this time, and you're getting paid X amount of money, per hour. So we can always put stuff like that in place. But like I said, it's a great opportunity for people to define their processes in the new system.
And coming back to the thing we were talking about in terms of prioritizing this and time, it's a key one. Not only in terms of having the training ideally on this dry run data, but ensuring that the dry run data is checked, which no doubt has been covered in previous episodes. But it's so key for the success thereafter, and the communication, and people realizing and seeing potentially, when you go live, well, if some data has been left behind, why? And kind of that being communicated and conveyed to the users as well during the training. And sometimes they pick up on things as well that realize or makes that team realize, actually, we'd like to change this and have this data brought in as well that we weren't going to bring in, or it provides that opportunity that's explained to them, so they realize, because otherwise frustration can occur because data isn't there out of perhaps choice. Obviously, everything can be brought across. Yeah, it's often unrealistic and not wanted anyway.
Where we were saying earlier, in terms of, perhaps your process was defined by the use of the old system. Similarly with data, perhaps you're using that field in your current system because there's nowhere else to put it. Yes, actually, your new system, there's specified a field or fields for that to go in. So again, that might be, why is that data? Why is this domain field brought across someone's applicant status that we've created? Well, probably because in your old system that might have been the only field available for that particular piece of data, so that's why you utilized it. We can change it.
Yeah, so really just needs to be identified. That's a really good point, because it's not just about changing the process and realizing there's opportunities to do the process. Sometimes you can be hindered by the data, exactly as you say. So it might be that even if you wanted to change the process, the data is in a place that would mean you'd have to continue. Well, actually, there's an opportunity to just having the training to realize that and change it so that you can realize the benefit and change the process in turn. So it's both aspects of the kind of process being looked at from the data side, as well as using the system and realizing things could be done differently too.
Okay, Ian. So we often see resistance from some users, particularly larger businesses, where perhaps people haven't been informed or consulted during the implementation, which we've obviously talked about. How can businesses manage resistance from employees?
Yeah, so doing a lot of the things that we just said,
That would all pray.
yeah, hopefully free agreement help stop it. But there might still be some resistance, and if you haven't done those things, then they're probably definitely exactly. So, but you can still try and mitigate some of that. Yeah, quite a number of ways of achieving this and doing this. So Lewin's force field analysis is quite a straightforward model that's often talked about. It's ultimately there's kind of barriers resisting change, pushing against it, and then there'll be forces that are pro change. Ideally, if you were to document perhaps the people, the teams, the reasons, whatever it is that's preventing change, look at those and try and reduce or even eliminate them. And then on the flip side, the reasons for the change, the things that are pro the change, the people, the items, the things that are pushing it through, and try and strengthen them or enhance them. So ultimately, you're going to get a tipping point where you're pushing through change rather than just meeting resistance.
When you say eliminate them, you don't mean Jimmy's not using the system, take him out.
So no, certainly don't advocate. But yeah, recruitment's cutthroat. There's high turnover, so sometimes people might not remain. Certainly, that's a factor in terms of communicating the benefits again regularly. That can be done through something that often works quite well. Is instead of buying the benefits from us as the provider, because of course we're biased. We'd like to think we're not, but of course we are. A workshop or a drop-in clinic or something like that happens, where people talk about the things that they found that are positive within the system that they're using and why they like it, what the benefit is to them. Other people might end up hearing that and thinking, oh, actually, yeah, that's pretty good. It reinforces that. It also helps with learning again. So people are kind of relearning things or revisiting things because they won't have necessarily implemented everything. But they're learning it from someone that's not biased, such as ourselves, or even someone that's trying to push through the change.
Yeah, or invested in the system because they won't be.
Exactly. So a kind of another perhaps standard user that actually is seeing a tangible benefit, and they've got an example where it's worked well for them, and hopefully more people will end up using it, and that can help. Another thing that can be really useful is just highlighting the investment that's gone into it in terms of time and money. So with recruitment software within a recruitment organization, it's such a key part of their infrastructure in terms of their tech stack that actually to try and resist it is actually a little bit foolhardy. Of course, we talked about change being scary, but if you are to resist it, you might be doing your career or your job at that organization a disservice. But certainly it being mentioned and highlighted that the cost and the investment thus far will provide that perspective of there's a lot of time and energy and effort and money that's gone into this. This needs to be a success.
And that happens again at the very start. As an organisation, we're looking to invest in our staff. We're looking to invest in our tech to enable you to work more efficiently and be more successful. So here's what we're going to put into it. Here's what we expect. Here's your part. Here's your role in it. It's the adoption of it and the use of it.
Yeah.
So not reject it.
Yeah.
Because you get taken out the back and shut up.
and keep highlighting the reason. What was the problem we were looking to solve? And this solves it. And actually beyond that, we've got all these nice to haves as well that are good. But there'll be things that go wrong. There'll be things that are missed. Having the humility to listen to the staff and try and address their concerns where possible, or even just holding your hands up and apologising goes a long way to actually putting that to bed, so people can move on. And otherwise, it can just end up being an echo chamber of someone that perhaps wasn't consulted, that wasn't considered for whatever reason, could forever just be a negative influence, and perhaps just the humility to say, we'll try and address those concerns. We're sorry, we didn't realise, or we made a mistake, and could also alleviate and kind of potentially rectify or remove that barrier. So all those little things could help.
And on the flip side of that, again, we've talked a little bit about before, but actually rewarding the use of the system and ensuring that those positive messages, like you said, are coming from the end users, perhaps in some kind of forum or workshop, but actually that's communicated across the business. Some of our customers that use the system to its fullest, they're doing really well in terms of constantly reviewing their processes, their training, etc. Actually reward staff for the use of the system, and that's not just if you don't use the system, you're not getting paid your commission, because that's not really rewarding good behaviour. Yes, that is an element. We have to have the data in there in order for these processes to take place. But actually, in terms of like data quality control, all that kind of stuff, you want to kind of empower or reward those good users, so they're almost highlighted to perhaps those that aren't using it as well.
Yeah. It's both, actually, isn't it? It's checking that people are using it, arguably, and having, but also in terms of, so that coming back to the training as to this is how we are going to use it. This is how it needs to be used. There are processes where these are effectively the non-negotiables. This is how you must use it. So collectively, we'll reap the benefits of that. And if you don't, these are the ramifications. And being strong to the point of just because someone's a really effective top biller, realizing that that's quite short-sighted if you are to just let them do whatever they want or perhaps not do anything within the system, because that sends the wrong message to other people, especially if they're a strong performer. And then you're not necessarily going to reap the benefits, but also, as you say, praising and rewarding those that do and recognizing it and thanking them and appreciating them and highlighting some of the things that have occurred off the back of them doing so. So yeah, certainly both parts I think can really help with that adoption and removing the barriers. If you get more out of it, if you utilize more of the system collectively and people are adhering to those kind of non-negotiables and those standards, the output's going to be greater than the sum of your parts. So you're going to be getting more out of it than you perceive you would in isolation, even if these people are effective. So certainly really trying to reward people and at the same time rectify and deal with the situations where perhaps people are choosing to not, should mean you get even more as a result. So yeah.
And there are some things we've put in place as a software organisation to try and help that. In terms of, you mentioned earlier things like mandatory creation fields. If you're creating like an applicant, a company client job placement records, here's some things that we expect you to complete. So an applicant must have an email address, telephone number, that kind of thing. So they can enforce that, but there is a fine line, isn't there, between kind of, some people can get quite annoyed if there's too much, or it's kind of, they deem it as irrelevant. So I suppose that communication is, we want you to complete this, and here's the reasons why. And actually we expect this to be done at the time you do it, not at the end of the day or end of the week, because actually that will skew our figures. So again, identify that, telling them the reasons why they've got to do that, not just there's a field there I have to fill in, it's really annoying because I don't know why. That can really help people buy into the use of the system, not just as an individual, but as a business, and help the business grow. And again, we've put in like Powerballs are really popular for those that use the system in a really good way, because it shows in real time the use of the system, and that there might be leaderboard showing outbound calls, and users want to be top of that leaderboard. It shows when they're putting a placement in at the time of doing it, that's coming up on a big screen, and their music's playing. Again, giving them the ability to select their own music, little things like that. It's a little buy-in.
Yeah, drives behaviour.
It really does. And actually, if other people witness that in the office, they're like, oh, I want to do that. Or I want to try and beat so-and-so is always at the top of that board, and it kind of drives the usage. But as much as the supplier can put these things in place in order to drive usage, you still need to be on the ground, because like we said earlier, ultimately those businesses know their processes better. You have to know how they want the system to be used. So put those things in place from a configuration point of view, but also like a message, delivering that message to the end user as to why.
Yeah, I think it's got to be regularly checked and looked at. Powerboards can be a real effective way of just kind of doing it organically, in effect. Just set it up and they'll run and people can see it in real time. But also checking and ensuring that it is continuously utilised in the way that you deem it should be. Those kind of non-negotiables of this is the process that we utilise because we've worked out that there are tangible benefits in doing so for a whole variety of ways and areas. That's so significant. It's so important. And you're right. There's only so much that the software can do there. That, ultimately, it's in the clients and the organisations, the recruitment agencies' interest to be on top of that, to get more out of the product continuously. You want good quality data, and if people are doing it after the event, that shows that it isn't working. It's just an administrative tool that they're seeing as something they have to use, and they're clearly not bought into the tangible benefits, because it's not just about putting in data for management reporting. There's all, because if it's a recruitment system worth its salt, which certainly ITRIS is in our view, you're going to be getting benefits if collectively you're utilising it a certain way, like a colony of ants or bees. You're going to get more from it because you're working together, and you're going to find more relevant applicants because the data's been put in real time, and so on and so forth, and hopefully ultimately just make more placements. It's not just about reporting and doing it after the event. That's a clear sign that something needs to change. Either the system doesn't work for you, or perhaps
users just not bought into it.
And perhaps something needs to,
like I say, as soon as they see it as admin, such as it's a bit of a dirty word in recruitment, it's I've got to do my admin. It shouldn't be seen as a chore that you can kind of put off and I'll get round to.
No, but because you're right. It's the wrong way of looking at it. Yeah, it's not admin. Yeah. It's not just admin for the sake of making a note. It's, if it doesn't occur, there's so many lost benefits to you and your colleagues.
If you're part of the systems, like we said earlier, all these other sort of automation, and that kind of stuff that might be triggered off the back of that one thing happening at that specific time, whether that's a source being put in at the point of adding an applicant, I'll just put that. No, this is important stuff, and here's the benefits of it. Yeah.
And even just in terms of being organised and managing yourself effectively, if you put those things in, you can have triggers and automation and it linked to other teams or even yourself, so you remember to do things and you're more efficient and effective. There are so many tangible benefits that if you're only viewing it as admin, you've either been trained incorrectly, or you haven't seen the benefits, or there aren't benefits to the system, or perhaps you're in the wrong job. Who knows?
Sub question: should the use of the system, in your opinion, form part of an individual's one-to-one?
Great shout. So sometimes we've seen the flip of it, that if you don't put the data in real time and correctly and stuff like that, then that might be a reason the commission isn't paid, and sometimes that is a way of getting people to do it. So the stick, the carrot being it being talked about in one-to-ones, and potentially it being part of the key performance criteria for appraisals as to these, this is how effective you've been at the non-negotiables, the things that we view as critical. Yes, absolutely. If there are kind of 5, 6, 7 main things you focus in on in terms of recruiters as to their performance, and some of it will obviously be revenue, I'd also argue a really important one culturally, to show how significant the system is and how much you buy into it being a benefit, that actually it becomes a focal point as well. But perhaps it's scored based on usage and the quality of your data, and also how much you advocate it and assist other people. The whole variety of factors perhaps within that. Yeah, definitely.
And but individuals love sort of development, salespeople, particularly, how can I improve? How can I do better? And if that's set out as one of these, well, you do all this stuff really good over here, great on the phone, you're great at cold calling as well as qualifying applicants, and great at formatting CVs and this other stuff, but actually you're one of the worst for putting comments on the system, or actually you only leave it till the end of the day to put your placements in, and they're skewing our figures. It's not good enough. Actually, you want to improve that, and then the rest, and then we can elevate you in terms of your status within the business. It might lead to pay rises or bonuses off the back of it.
Yeah, you're right. And if people aren't using it particularly, then you're not really going to be able to analyse that data to assist them so it's obvious where they can improve and be more effective and ultimately make more placements.
And then you might get back, I don't know how to use that part of the system. Therefore, identifying some trading me and knowledge gaps.
Yeah, and then that continuous learning piece again, where, okay, great, we've got this whole host of things that actually a number of people don't know about. Let's continuously train people because just doing it up front, it's just going to drop away. That knowledge is going to drop away with the high turnover that exists in the recruitment.
Yeah, it just erodes over time, and you need to be stem that. So, and that, again, from a line manager's point of view, perhaps can help as a line manager identify what parts of my team using well and what are they not. Being able to score that is a good word. Okay, next question. We're near the end. So some larger organizations look to have their own internal trainer from a software and perhaps a recruitment process point of view. From a tech or a software point of view, what are the benefits of having an internal trainer or systems expert within the business? And is this a full-time role?
Lots of benefits to having an internal trainer. The larger the organization, the more it makes sense. But obviously, the smaller you are, the less likely that is to occur. If you're a 10-user organization, it's probably incredibly unlikely. For one, they're hopefully the usage decision maker in terms of, like we were talking about earlier, those non-negotiables of what you'd have to use. And therefore, they can see in real time and correct where that perhaps isn't occurring, so that gets put back on track. Whilst clients can always lean on us to assist and help, the response is going to be quicker if you've got an internal trainer.
Yeah.
That knowledge is going to be able to be drip fed to people. They'll be able to react in real time, but also they're going to better understand their processes. So whilst we're complete experts within our product, we're never going to be an expert in terms of the nuances of how each client specifically utilizes Itris or the things that they do around it. And so having that person in place is better able to translate our product to how the organization works. So again, that just really helps with adoption and usage and positive usage. So yes, absolutely. I think it's so useful that some of the best clients we have that use the product have internal trainers, and they assist with training in terms of producing content internally that's kind of bespoke to how they would use the product, and they'll have their own perhaps courses and documentation. But also that means that they can have regular sessions or clinics or whatever it is that people perhaps can drop into, or it's they're enrolled on automatically or whatever it might be, to continue that upskilling of the system, rather than it being, we've rolled it out, we've learned the system, and like we were talking about, potentially the knowledge dropping off. Even with on-demand content, which we have inbuilt in the system within the knowledge base, not everyone's going to utilize that, even though it's pretty obvious and there's so many learn more buttons, and actually the system's pretty easy to use anyway.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, not everyone is going to go into those areas. So having someone, and it becoming part of the culture of continuous learning, of we're always trying to look at how we maximize the usage of the product, that person's critical for it, because they'll be able to identify the gaps against those kind of key areas that they utilize or it's been determined people should utilize within the product.
Good. And in terms of, I suppose, like you said earlier, if you're a smaller sort of organization, having someone specific as an internal trainer perhaps doesn't make actual sense, if anything.
Yeah.
Larger organizations, like we said, often have an internal trainer or systems expert, whatever you want to call it. They might not necessarily be fully qualified in training, but actually they're just like really make sense because they understand the processes and all this kind of stuff. How can that be identified, I suppose, from a smaller organization's point of view? What are the kind of key traits they should look out for in terms of, we don't want to go and recruit someone to do this.
Yeah.
We want to try and utilize someone internally as part of their role. So we might take something away from them because we want to give them this that's so important. What are the kind of key traits they should look out for?
Yeah, you're right. It's arguably a better place to start looking at someone internally, because they're going to be quicker at being able to assist the business, because they're already going to know how the business works. Potentially there might already be a recruiter or someone that knows the business particularly well, so that then it just becomes a transition of learning the system to an even higher level, perhaps, or perhaps already they know it well. To come back to I appreciate I haven't answered that question. So to come back to the point you were asking in the last question was, is this a full-time role? The larger the organization is, probably yes. The smaller it is, well, actually, perhaps you're not hiring an internal trainer, but you're having a systems expert, or you're having someone that might do it a day or 2 days a week as part of a job. Well, that can be viable. There can be other aspects that they get involved in, perhaps in terms of marketing, or a whole host of things. And you know, whilst someone that's a qualified trainer, there's going to be advantages to someone in terms of traits, someone that's empathetic, someone that is actually pro systems, pro change, buys into the product. Those things really matter. You might go and find an communicator in there. You might find someone that's, you know, a highly qualified trainer, but they might not be what I'd argue is a systems trainer. They might be a soft skills trainer, and sometimes those things don't go hand in hand. They won't necessarily always translate and like doing the systems training stuff. So if you've got someone that likes technology, likes engaging with people, enjoys being the source of knowledge and helping others, they enjoy that aspect, and that's a good person to look at. But also that has confidence and can command the room and people buy into as well. So it's not necessarily something that just someone that's pro or likes the system can do. They also have to have a few other aspects, and in terms of character traits and skills.
And they need to have proper access around the systems. One of the things you were saying in terms of like the kind of systems expert, to be an administrator of a system can be quite a responsibility. So if you change something in the back end, it can really impact the front end users or the day-to-day users. So having that ability to look at what those sort of pain points are, and then sort of referring that to the system's configuration, or the communication with us as a supplier. So here's the current frustration. Is there a way we can do that? Yes, here's some short form content on how users can do that. Here's what you could deliver. Here's some content you might want to create your own sort of version of, etc. But actually, here's how to go into the system in the back end. So in our case, the utility program, and actually change that. That's quite a responsibility.
So if they're really junior, that might not play into the part where I was talking about them having the confidence to deliver the training within that organisation, and they might not have really kind of almost their place and their status. But then that also links to the authority. So it's the authority they command enough respect that even if they are confident enough to deliver the training, the people listen to them and adhere to what they say. So there is an element of power and authority that ideally would be there, and them having the power and authority to make changes to the system. But also, if people aren't using the system, perhaps they're in a place where they can, say that, no, it has to be used in this way, and they feel empowered to highlight it and, mention it to whoever that it needs to be mentioned to thereafter. They've actually been trained. This isn't a knowledge gap issue. This is actually someone choosing to not use it. This is kind of a behavioural issue that perhaps needs to be addressed elsewhere. So
in their one-to-one. Whatever. And I was just about to say, you just said it there, that whole empowering piece in terms of, making sure as the organisation or the business that's selected or identified this person, empower them to be able to make those informed decisions and deliver those messages on behalf of the business. This is not my opinion of how you should use the system. This is defined process, and here's the things that are put in place. And again, great for an individual to deliver that message that so-and-so does this really well, and here's how it benefits them. If you do this, here's how it can benefit the business. Here's how it can benefit your career with us moving forward, or any organisation.
So it not being a token role. Yes, it's certainly supported and viewed as actually this is an invaluable, really important role that's providing so many benefits to us that ultimately result in better data, better usage, more placements, greater efficiency, better customer service, all those kind of things. When you realise that and perceive it that way and support that person accordingly, rather than sometimes where someone's just, it doesn't work out for them in recruitment and they're kind of just, oh, maybe you should do that, and it not really being something that's viewed as really beneficial and critical. But it being viewed that way from management and kind of cascaded and communicated that way, that person really being supported will really help with all of those other aspects and the better utilization of the product and the adoption, if it's from adoption point or if you're an existing user that's been using it for a while, just the maintaining and improving of it. You really want that kind of situation to occur, and the product evolves. So have someone that can actually assist with that as well.
We can also support that. From a supplier's point of view, we can really help support that individual who's been selected in terms of their knowledge of the system, how to deliver, and give them advice. Yourself, you're very well qualified and have lots of experience. We're in a good place to actually advise these people if they've got any questions on, how can I improve this? I'm really struggling with this. So last question. As we know, learning doesn't stop at the initial rollout of the system, which we've, again, touched on quite a few times today. What can businesses do to ensure the constant learning from their consultants and ensuring they're communicating with the supplier correctly?
Yeah, so many of the points we've already talked about, if you've got an internal trainer, will massively help. But it's a cultural thing of continuous improvement. So if culturally that's very much adopted and people recognise and realise that it's not just day one go live, we've had the learning already and we've been supported, that actually it continues thereafter, then that's a big part of it. So through many of the aspects we talked about with communication and perhaps an internal decision maker or an internal trainer that's helping with that. But yeah, it just being as much as possible, as regularly as possible. So even if it isn't an internal trainer, the on-demand resources for people to be able to utilize really matters. When it comes to updates to the system, obviously those are communicated and conveyed. Certainly we let people know through a variety of different means. And if that perhaps key point of contact, that central person, perhaps the internal trainer knows about it, they can deliver those things. So again, you're getting more out of the system as new functionality and improvements occur. That can really help. It's also a two-way street. So we obviously have suggestions from our users that we implement, and a quite a high proportion end up going in. We've looked at it in terms of clients. But one of the things that can really help with that is when there is a key point of contact that really understands the business, that can really help us understand the significance of that suggestion, rather than it being perhaps one user where it's kind of centric to how they'd use it. If it's that systems person, that internal trainer, and they're kind of highlighting to us as an organization, out of all the things, this is the most useful to us if it were to change, or these are the things that that can really help us understand how the system could work better for them in terms of us looking at the suggestions and prioritizing them accordingly. Of course, it won't necessarily mean we do them or do them all, because it has to work for us, and we're an off-the-shelf provider. We're not a bespoke software provider, as we all know. But that does help us understand which are of greatest use and benefit.
And I think some of those suggestions, like you mentioned there, will come via our system, because again, we've empowered our end users to be able to click a button and recommend, to us what they would like the system to do. We implement those.
And the why, which is helpful, because there's the box within that, because often
it's not very hard. So we ask them the feature, and it is, and then why is this important to you? So we understand.
Yeah, because sometimes it really isn't obvious to us as to why, because we're not trying to use it, and we're not recruiters day out. So
what we also do to try and improve that is we've got obviously customer success managers who proactively reach out to customers on a regular basis, and also discuss with them. So what we're trying to say won't just necessarily come through suggestions, and through training. Sometimes it would just be a proactive conversation. We'll pick up the phone. How the user's finding it, and sometimes that can be, actually we get a bit frustrated with this, or we're not sure how to use this, and then that customer success manager will then go across departments internally and figure out, is there something we could be doing here? Is this something that's there already? Perhaps we've identified some knowledge gaps. Perhaps there's some conversation with training to occur. So we'll always try and lead that, I suppose, as best we can. In terms of the software updates you mentioned there, and that's a really good one. What we've seen, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, with our new product, Archers 9, is we release updates fairly regularly. Once every 4 to 6 weeks. We're on a great trajectory, with our software, and we've got a really decent roadmap in place. What I have seen is some businesses just kind of ignore the updates, and they're not, they're not necessarily brought into the updates because perhaps it doesn't have a feature they need or have requested, but actually all that happens is they then don't update regularly, and actually the version they're then on can become quite behind where the software actually is, and they don't communicate this. Here's some new stuff that Itris does, internally. So sometimes the users just think, it just does this. Actually, it does all this other stuff. but you just don't know about it. And that's again where that knowledge erosion kind of accelerates. So you're not just got the knowledge erosion in terms of what people are learning how to do, but if the system's improving and the knowledge is eroding, and there's almost a bigger gap to fill in terms of those either knowledge gaps or
one of the things that happens so often that is just so frustrating is that we'll be asked about or perhaps a criticism might come our way that something hasn't been implemented that someone would have liked or would like, and so often it's the case that it actually has occurred, and it's occurred in part because they suggested it and quite a while now. So it was a few releases ago, and we've already let the client know, and perhaps a number of the key stakeholders as well, and they just haven't
acted.
Yeah, it wasn't acted on. Perhaps they haven't obtained that release, or they have, but haven't realised it and made it part of their internal training or rollout. So whilst we do let people know when they first log into the system, there's like a pop-up, like an announcements page that appears and shows some of the key highlights of that release, and they can go and find out more. Often the reality is users just dismiss it because they're busy. They're just perhaps logged in, they're coming to work, they don't have time to do that, their time's short already. But that stuff still can be accessed within the product at the very top with the latest release, and then go back to that, or via the knowledge base. But actually, in an ideal world, if there is a kind of central point of contact that perhaps rolls out the training or communicates things, they can ensure that, right, we're on this latest version. Actually, this was suggested by me, or this was suggested by this user. Brilliant, well done, thank you. And it's there for us to use. So let's go and use it because too often, unfortunately, that just doesn't occur. And we developed it, and we really want them using it because they've asked for it. And that's a real shame when that doesn't occur.
And I think, like you said, it can be, from our point of view, it can be a little bit frustrating in terms of we've listened to your end users, we've delivered this piece of functionality, we made you aware of it, you didn't roll it out. But actually, we didn't just communicate this with you, we shouted about it across all of our social media platforms.
Yeah.
We did a showcase video around it, there's a training video around it, there's a knowledge-based article around it, there's all this short-form content we've created to be able to digest this. We've not utilised it. And I think, again, we've touched on this before, but just following your supplier on social media, it's such, if you encourage your users to be bought into the system, like they should be, and you've communicated all of those benefits, getting them to follow them on social media, and this isn't me trying to increase our followers. This is actually, it's real stuff. If I'm interested in something, I'll follow it on social media. So for me, it's either watches or trainers, and my Instagram is generally filled with that. But actually, if I was a recruiter and there was this tech that I was using that's constantly evolving, and I was actually bought into using it because it makes me money, I will follow that, and I will keep up to date with what's going on, because I don't want to be left behind.
Yeah, and some people will, and some people do, but it's often the minority, sadly.
Yeah.
But that's where, if there is an internal key point of contact, and like you were talking about earlier in terms of one-to-ones or even appraisals, ideally that'd be a key part of their role, that they're staying on top of every release and working out what are the benefits of all of these items. Some of them we've perhaps suggested ourselves, or some of them we haven't, but other people have, and actually that's really useful. Let's ensure that people are aware of that. That's a nice to have, so they can use it if they choose. Or actually, that's part of our process now. We can get more out of this system as we're spending money on.
We can improve our process with this new piece of functionality.
And drive the users that way. Yeah. So certainly it kind of links back to have an internal kind of key point of contact that is your system's ITRIS person or and your internal trainer
to breed that positivity as well. So, hi guys, good news.
Yeah,
ITRIS has just released this, or our software provider's just released this, or they've got a webinar that you can attend, or they've just released this new sort of article and video that can really help us improve these areas of our business, and just communicating that internally. Okay, guys, that's been episode 9 of The Corner. I think you've made it to the end. Appreciate it. There's a lot there to digest. If you've got any questions for Ian, drop us a comment. Thanks for coming on, Ian. Been a pleasure. Nice thing. It's been great to share a lot of that knowledge with our listeners and watchers as well. Ironically, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you get updates on our content, but also our software as well. So quite often we'll release showcase videos which can help you see what we're up to. Hope to see you again next time on The Corner.